Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand. Brand, Peterson. Take note. These are, I think, really important allies for us, particularly those of us who have been involved in Christian ministry. And Lord knows the church has very few allies. In saying all this, I want to doff my cap to Paul Vanderlei, whose blogs, he's an American Reformed minister, who's picked up on this, as well as a number of us have done, and said, Brand, Peterson, but particularly in this video I want to say about Jordan Peterson, hey, he's on our territory, isn't this interesting? He's saying the sort of things that we should be saying or wanted to say, and yet in a kind of old style preacher way, he's filling auditoriums. He's reaching people in a way that Billy Graham and C.S. Lewis in the 20th century did so successfully. He's sort of circumnavigating the normal ways of doing things, and that's kind of amazingly interesting and useful for us. But the danger is, and this is for me as the nub, is that we in the churches could be complacent, we could feel threatened, or we could be so full of churchy business that we don't see what's coming, and we don't get a sense that actually this is good news for us, that this person and others are not a threat, even though they are on our terrain. They are allies. They are tilling the soil for us, and we can become interpreters of what they are saying, and we can take this forward. And we might even be approached by people who have never thought about coming to speak to those of us in ministry, have never thought about walking through the doors of a church, because they've been touched by this. They've got a new angle on themselves and the great story of life and meaning and universe and what have you. Of course, the other way that we might easily just chuck this into the long grass and say, hey, Jordan Peterson, he's just some, isn't he just some sort of alt-right bigot? And Russell Brand, well, he's a kind of lefty loony. And I think that would be that would be pathetic, actually, because that's a caricature. And for instance, if we dismiss Russell Brand simply because we don't agree with his politics, then I think we undermine the enormous amount of work that he has been doing on reaching out people who are in addiction and have struggled to get on that journey of recovery. And if we play to that caricature about Dr. Peterson, I think then we actually are kind of going to miss his brilliance, and that actually, if you look at the YouTube, the evidence is there. His political stance is actually quite neutral and liberal, but what he is saying is uncomfortable, and it's easy, isn't it, when we're uncomfortable, particularly in the milieu. What do if we don't like someone on social media? We don't like what they're saying, is we trash them because it's easy to do so from a distance. It's easy to not have a debate and a conversation, because that, as Dr. Peterson's saying, that is the postmodern way of doing things. I mean, some people call it cultural Marxism. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. That's the way that's the road to perdition, where we just trash those that we disagree with, because we supposedly are the only people who have the one perspective that's true and valid, and that's been horrific to see that scaled up throughout the internet, to see that on social media, and I think it's one of the main things that Jordan Peterson addresses. And in that sense, archetypally, he is and archetypes and symbolism and Jungian stuff is a lot of what Jordan Peterson has to say to us. in that sense, he's a bit like John the Baptist. He's tilling the ground, he's clearing the pathway. And I think if we as churches can't see that, then that's pathetic, because here is someone who is making a road that could lead many to a deeper sense of their own identity, and beyond that, an encounter with the great Judeo-Christian story. And he's a real, though he doesn't put out whether he's a believer or not, he wants to encourage us to embrace the West's story, the greatest story ever told, the biblical Judeo-Christian truth story that's shaped our civilization for 20 centuries, and that at the moment we are quite happily trashing because we think it's boring, irrelevant, and untrue. And he's saying we do so at our peril. He's inviting us to look afresh at this. And if as churches we don't respond to that, I don't know what else we could be doing in terms of reaching out to millennials and particularly the kind of vast amount of the population, young males, who are desperately looking for meaning, who are wanting to know that they have worth, and that they are they do better in life being heroes rather than victims. St. Paul says about character. Suffering produces character. Character produces endurance. Endurance produces hope. That there's a lot in what of Jordan Peterson is saying that invites people to discover that some of that kind of basic biblical language that we're so familiar, that we're reading about every Sunday down here. So what else can I say about Jordan Peterson? Well, I suppose very quickly, a quick sort of biog. Though this is all around on the internet, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. Firstly, if you haven't seen it, watch the interview that happened in 2018 between Kathy Newman of Channel 4 News and himself. And I think what shocked people about that is the way in which the presenter, instead of actually really addressing his points, just keeps on trashing him. Peter Jordan answers a question, she doesn't agree with it, so she trashes him, and so on and so on and so on, going to his reputation all the time. And that's what he's trying to say, is that we need to have deeper, more civilized conversations to save our communities, our civilizations, to save our relationships. It's what St. Benedict was saying, that monks have to take in their rule of life, in their vow, a convertio morum, a daily embracing of difficult and hard conversations that are about daily conversion and renewal. And if we're not prepared to do that, if we're just going to pull up the drawbridge, then that's kind of pathetic. And it's no wonder that many will go off, and again, particularly young men, will go off to the political extreme ends of the world, because they'll find there for a while something of what they want to hear. Or they will go to other easy solutions, despair, drugs, addiction, addictive behaviour, bad relationships. And Jordan Peterson is inviting us all to think about what do we mean when we mean about who we are as moral people, as characters. How do we act out in the world in a way that is ordered and that is creative? How do we embrace the kind of monster that is within each of us. How do we work through that? And over and over again, what he's saying is he's saying as a clinical psychologist that the issues are theological. And I think at times what I've found within the church, and you see this a lot in the Church of England, and I'm sorry if I'm putting my neck out here and criticising the church, often what we see is a kind of pandering to what he calls the postmodern way of doing things. So, what we need to be is more, we need to kind of embrace the kind of inclusivity, diversity, politics, which divides the world into victims and the oppressor, and the oppressed and the oppressed. And if we do that, then everything's going to be okay. People are going to come swarming back to the church. The ranks are going to be filled, and people are going to just be tapping us on the back and saying, "Thank you for that." Well, that hasn't worked so far. I don't see the statistical evidence that that's working. I see the church kind of harping on about some of the big social issues at the time, and that's great. But I see very little about reaching out to, say, millennials about some of the deep kind of existential stuff that's going on in life. I see little of that. And that's a shame. I think that's where Dr. Peterson is inviting us to get deep into the code of what it means to be a human being, and to think that through, and to see that work as, it's not about he who can scream loudest winning, but rather it is about, I feel like what Oscar Wilde said, we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking up to the stars. It's about looking up to the stars. And I'm kind of being transformed from that, of finding salvation, of making that part of our story in the short years that we have. And that requires it requires grace. It requires a sort of inner gumption. It requires kind of being athletic about spiritual life. It involves us, I think, embracing, again, one of Jordan Peterson's big things he goes on about, that the world at times is damn awful, and that there's, that life is about suffering, and that life is about dragging your own cross up the hill. He was asked actually recently, what is on the top of the hill? If you're dragging a cross up, what are you going to find on the top of the hill? And I leave this as a conclusion to my first YouTube video on this. He said, when you drag your cross up the hill, what you find is the city of God.